This is Cosmic Conquest, a game that's kind of like the Avengers with dice rolling, Yahtzee dice rerolls. You're fighting each other with all these special abilities with the heroes. Like, look at these. Yep, so you load up 3 comic book looking dudes called contenders, then look to conquer planets and defeat your opponent's contenders, all the while using character abilities and buyable cards. To attack, you'll be rolling dice as the attacker or defender, then getting rerolls once. Wait a second, choosing to reroll dice? And then constantly attacking each other, and then choosing to buy cards from the middle? This sounds a lot like the popular party game King of Tokyo. It's just that this game has way more going on with abilities and hence death. Cosmic Conquest is for 2 to 4 players and runs about 45 to 90 minutes. We played it at the 2 and 3 player count with how many times we played on screen. Oh, this is called an Alpha Clash story to go off of the Alpha Clash TCG, and this is a prototype for a sponsored review. As always, we never compromise scoring here at Shelfside, but if that sort of things bothers you, totally understand, feel free to click off now. But now let's get into the how to play. The goal is to get 20 gambit points, which are basically victory points. To do that, you'll do a bunch of things like conquering plants by meeting their requirement, healing your contenders, aka characters, a certain amount, doing a certain amount of damage during combat, and of course, killing your opponent's contenders. Oh, by the way, contenders are either on an unrivaled or awakened state, which is basically being dormant at the unrivaled state with only a passive ability, or they're awakened, which is face up, with 2 abilities to use during combat. Contenders are also bundled together on the board and have to move together. A turn is like this. First, you reduce any cooldowns on abilities, then you get 2 EXP. Then you can decide to awaken any of your contenders for 5 EXP apiece. Next, you can buy armory cards with your EXP. You can buy as many as you want. Some are weapons to equip to your dudes, others are just cards in your hand you can use during the action phase or during combat. Every time you buy one, it gets immediately replaced. Then we have the action phase. Here you do 2 things. Either you can move your group of contenders one space but not diagonally, or you can attack an opponent that shares the same space as you. This combat is the meat of the game, and we'll explain it a bit later. Aside from doing actions during the action phase, you can also spend 2 EXP to teleport anywhere on the map. You can only do this once a round. Then for the end of the round, you can take over any planet you're sitting on. If no one owns it, you can do the conquer. If you can achieve that, you get your 2 gambit points and grab the planet card for the passive bonus. If someone owns a planet, you have to overthrow, which is typically a bit harder to do. Then you get 1 gambit point and grab the planet passive. Combat time. Now time to explain fighting. So after you use an action to fight, you pick one of your 3 contenders. He's fighting now, and then you're attacking one of your 3 opponent contenders. Both players roll their dice. Then the attacker gets to choose to reroll any of the dice once first. Then the defender gets to choose to reroll any of their dice. Then it's time to do combat actions. The defender can do support actions, which are using cards or abilities with this symbol on them. They can use up to 2. Once the defenders have used theirs, then the attackers get to do the attacker combat action and support actions, meaning cards or abilities with either of these 2 symbols on them. Then you just resolve damage. Swords get negated by shields, double swords are worth 2 swords, and misses do nothing. So both contenders can take damage. Remember, if you deal 5+ damage, you get a gambit point. Back to the big picture of the game, you keep playing until someone hits 20 gambit points, or 10 turns have passed. Then you get bonuses for endgame scoring, like having certain home plans for your heroes. Then it's over. Pros! Component pros time. And first let's talk about these contender boards, cause man, them being so thick really gives them all a presence. And each contender board has cool bright art with alternate poses for the front and back. Like seriously, you get 18 contenders, so that's 36 pieces of art. Oh, speaking of art, there's also unique art on all the armory cards, which is pretty mind-blowing because there's 80 cards. We gotta shout out how they put the height and weight for each of the contenders. It's a small detail, but really adds a lot of character and imagery. Like Iron Piston is 4'6" and 200 pounds. Wow, he's insanely heavy. How is that even possible? Oh, it's because he's a dwarf, just like Gearwind. Or you have a finance bro like Genesis, 6'4". Yep, this guy has just been picked up from Wall Street. Or, 8 feet. Yeah, this guy is like a god. Or a dragon, 35 feet and 1,000 pounds. Yeah, makes sense. Lastly, for components, there is a pretty cool insert in this pretty tall box, and it's a good idea to store the planet boards vertically. Okay, now for the gameplay pros, and let's first start with the core of this game, which is the combat system. It combines pusher luck and ability optimization in a thoughtful way. And before we go any further, man, the decision to have a 2x swords on attack and defense, this makes rolling very entertaining because you always have a chance to have a bonkers banana roll and do way more damage than expected. Like the defender could do 10 damage back. For push your luck, there's a free reroll you get to do after your roll, which lets you slightly push your result towards more of what you want. For example, you can just play risky and push for an attack. Then you reroll all of your non-double swords dice. That's greedy. Like if you're mega cocky, you want to reroll swords to try to get a double sword. Okay, that's straightforward, but when that gets tricky is when you're not sure what a defending opponent is planning, as attackers always reroll first. Like if you think they're launching a massive counterattack based off you rolling no shields, maybe you actually just rerolled some of your attacks to get more shields because you don't want your attacking contender to just die, because that's feeding your opponent points. This also goes to now attacking feels surprisingly different from defending, because not only are the dice slightly different, but just changing the sequencing does a lot. Attacker plays abilities last, and let me tell you, playing abilities last in this game matters. So now let's get into all the abilities. The fact that each contender has their own attacking and defending ability, and that both of them can be used during attacking, really adds a huge puzzle element of when to trigger them. Remember that only the contender that attacked can use their sword action, but pretty much everything else is fair game. Some notable combos are to add symbols to your roll somehow, and since you meet a criteria, you get a cool ability, like overthrowing a planet. Or how about something self-contained within one contender? Getting defense, so now you don't take damage. And because you didn't take damage, then you can heal. Or just rolling more dice for more of a chance to get swords, then you convert them all into double attacks. Oh gosh, yeah, cards. There's all sorts of these armory cards that really color up combat. They'll let you roll more dice, gain EXP for doing something, or even heal yourself, which remember is points, but now you just use the one out of the two combat actions to heal. This culminates into a system where you're really planning all these bought armory cards before combat. Then you're thinking about what cards your opponent has because buys are public, then which contender you should target, and attacking with which contender. And finally, which abilities you should play. Or say you're an attacker and you know the defender has impenetrable scales to give them EXP, you don't want to accidentally feed them EXP before their turn starts. Also, there's the weapon armory cards, which add so much life to combat when these contenders are clashing. Like you can have a contender do damage to contenders that aren't even fighting, or give a contender lifesteal. Remember, healing can get you victory points. Or now your contender can literally let you farm EXP and victory points from fighting and hitting well. If we look at the matching dice puzzling to the extreme, you have Scarab Cloak. If you have this equipped, if you get exactly 5 swords, you get another action. So what if you just use technological symmetry to give 3 swords and 3 shields so you can make it happen? Like hypothetically, your turn could go on for a really long time if you keep getting matching 5s for Scarab Cloak. As a whole, the armory system keeps the game state constantly evolving with new shiny things to play with. And it's mad cheap to just get more of what you want by wiping it all for 2 EXP and also counterplay your opponents if they want something and you can't afford it. Or you can just get the planet that helps you wipe. Now it's time to talk about the 18 diverse contenders for all the asymmetry in the game. Now they're split up into 3 categories, and so when you're eventually drafting them at the beginning of the game, there's some interesting things to look out for in each one. Saviors generally have a way to heal others, Sentinels are about preventing damage, and Destroyers generally have ways to do tons of damage. Saviors could be like Kapuris, someone who can heal your team every turn by just paying EXP, or he can let you run away after combat, or this really skinny bro who can trade in weapons for health, or he can injure himself to help others. Sentinels are like Doomcaster, who restores health if fighting on a planet you control, and gives shields off of his other abilities. Or the Thanos looking dude on the box, who locks opponents' misses all the time. And his other ability of energy manipulation changes 2 dice to misses and gives strength for each miss the opponent rolls. This centaur can give additional rerolls, but his sheer strength is adding 2 double swords if he has a weapon. Give a moment for a centaur with shoulder mounted rockets on his back. Oh my goodness. And then there's Iron Piston, who can change each shield to a double sword in final combat. Holy cow, that's a lot of damage. Again, with 18 of these, and you need 1 of each category on your team, there's no shortage of ways to theorycraft teams and counterdraft. Like I, for one, love the synergy between Amalgamite and Valen Solari, where you can use Valen to spend EXP to add shields, and then Amalgamite uses his ability so the enemy contender loses 1 health for each shield in your final combat value. Well, yeah, that could possibly just one-shot an opponent. Or you can do this off of single swords. Feng Yin gives 4 single swords, then use the Clarity contender to make a non-fighting contender lose 1 health for each single sword you roll. Look, we've only played this game 4 times, so we haven't combined all of these, so I'm sure there's some combos we haven't seen yet, especially involving the armory deck. But we'll just say that depending on your strategy, you can either load up on weapons on 1 awakened contender and use the other unawakened contenders to support them with their passives, or on the other extreme, you can go a more egalitarian route and awaken all of your contenders as soon as you can. And instead of using weapons or armory cards with EXP, you basically have 6 abilities to choose from. The last pro to wrap this up is that Cosmic Conquest does symbol manipulation and pay off well. There's almost always a possibility to convert symbols into other symbols or add more symbols by just using armory cards or certain contender abilities. And if you really don't have any of those, well, at minimum, you have your reroll to at least feel some agency with dice rolls. Nice, roll to something entirely different. And also, damage always matters because dealing 5 or more damage on an attack gets you 1 point. And preventing 5 or more damage on attack prevents your opponent from getting a point. Like Earth needs 4+ matching symbols to conquer. Or if you have Earth and match 4 symbols, you can teleport anywhere after a combat. Or if you're able to prevent your opponent from doing 8 or more damage to you in a combat, they won't be able to get this planet. Cons! Now it's time for component cons. And yes, this is an alpha version of this game, so I imagine a lot of these component issues will be glossed over. Like for one, these 3D printed looking character holders came a little broken off here. And then also, these acrylic standees are not double-sided. Yeah, but I mean, this is whatever for a prototype, right? The most annoying thing for sure is that the EXP tokens are not double-sided. Okay, note to anyone making a game, if you're getting generic tokens all the time, don't make them single-sided. These tokens are half the time face down, meaning blank half the time, which was infuriating. Okay, so now for not as bad things. On the boards, it's kind of annoying how HP dials are not mirrored. We're doing the mechanical thing of going from back to front. Makes it look like you suddenly have lots of HP. Like, no, I don't have 15 health, I actually have 51. What the heck? This could be alleviated by having a single dial, because right now there's 2 dials. We're having the quantity go up to 99 seems like overkill, but hey, there are plans to have other game modes, so maybe we really do need more health here. There's also varying degrees of looseness with these dials, so they can get easily knocked while you're playing. While we're still on contender boards, for home planet interacting with a good amount of abilities and endgame scoring, it should definitely be printed on both sides of the board. And there probably should be a cheat sheet of all the contender abilities, because trying to see what your opponent's awakened abilities are when they're across the table is pretty darn annoying. Sometimes they're face down too. Now we get to planets. There is zero way to keep track of who owns what planet on the map. Like, why isn't there a player token you could put down? This isn't help that some planets look really similar, and especially from far away can just muddy together. Some symbols are also not great in this game. Like the Gambit point 1 for being so important is pretty vague when shrunk down. And health also doesn't look distinct, or how the non-combat action versus combat action symbols are quite similar. I would say a lot of symbols end up blending together because they follow this vertical look that just doesn't feel distinct. And then this D20 to keep track of turns is tiny text and should be a spin down at the very least. It just unfortunately can get forgotten for being the literal clock on the game. Like, think about how most games have a place on the board to do time. Okay, now for the rulebook, which has weirdness. First, it does not explain what Unrivaled versus an Awakened Contender is, which is a key part of the game. There really needs to be a segment at the beginning explaining the difference between the two. And why is Unrivaled even a term? Like, Awakened, I get. They're face up and ready to fight. But Unrivaled? Like, really? It makes it sound like there's no one fighting them, and can get confused for not fighting during combat. Rather, why don't they just use the term Unawakened? Actually, the rulebook also doesn't write in that you move the turn marker down after each player's turn anywhere in the text. So moving this down after a turn may sound self-explanatory at first, but actually when you're slowly looking at a player's turn sequence and how the turn marker is a tiny d20, it's easy to forget about this and then lose track of turns. More ruled weirdness is when it doesn't explain the cooldown default, which you can assume to be at 3 since that's what cooldowns are on all the boards, so why not just say 3? Or say cooldown default equals 3. Rules should also definitely clarify how it is to deal damage versus losing health, because that matters in many instances when someone is at 1 health and were to take 9 health, but only lose 1 health, so someone doesn't get all the bonuses for dealing damage. For abilities like Accrual, this really matters. Gameplay cons time. Now there is some imbalance with the contenders, and we know you're supposed to draft them, so it's not a huge deal on the imbalance, but let's point out a couple of weird instances here. Generally, characters that give guaranteed symbols within their passive are going to be stronger. Remember that you can use passives on the Unrivaled side. Example, Feng Yin, restore 2 health for free if you decide not to reroll dice. Yeah, that's great because sometimes rerolling dice isn't needed. Or Gearwin, whenever she's fighting, get a guaranteed shield. Or Harmonious Warren, which gives a guaranteed double sword if on a planet you control. Or Amalgamite, who if he has a weapon attached, which is really easy to do, he gives guaranteed sword and shield. So 2 symbols whenever fighting. Iron Piston can almost always guarantee having less than or equal unrivaled contenders, since there's usually going to be 2 or 1 unrivaled contender. So this guy can just add 2 swords handily. Contrast these to Anzudok, who limits your opponents to only rerolling 2 dice. That's basically nothing. Or Valen Solari is awful in the team comp that can't use her shield bonus properly because her passive sucks. When she fights and receives no damage, you heal 2 health. Okay. It's pretty rare to be fighting and not take any damage, especially if your opponent knows you have this ability. I'm not going to go through and compare all the contenders because that would be ridiculous, so let's use this example of 2 destroyers and how one hits a lot harder than the other. This dragon can activate both of his abilities to add a guaranteed 4 damage, then 1 double sword for each shield you roll, so not surprising to get 8 damage just off using these 2 abilities. Then it can discard an opponent's weapon. Shadow Blade, on the other hand, just does additional damage if you roll the 1/6 chance per die of a double sword. And his body can only give double swords and can do 3 more damage to a non-fighting contender if he has a weapon equipped. Getting guaranteed more symbols also helps proc the armory cards, which give you more goodies after battle. And getting more symbols makes it more likely to get matching symbols. Typically, screw the rerolls and making opponents lose a set amount of health off abilities. You really want to just go for more symbols. And thank goodness this game is supposed to be played with the draft, because we found out that Harmonious Warren, when unchecked, can be bonkers. So you can get Mechadralia that gives you +1 sword and +1 shield for each unawakened contender. So you just have 2 unawakened contenders. And Camp Mechadralia, so you get the Harmonious Warren defense bonus. So then when you're on the planet and attacking, you get +4 sword and +2 shield just off your passive and planet. Then you can add +4 swords guaranteed off your hive mind ability. You can pull people into fighting on that planet by playing these armory cards. So yeah, this is strong and this really needs to be counterplayed against in game. Then the last part about imbalance isn't an issue, but rather this armory card, Cosmic Wrath. It makes all contenders lose 5 health, and if you do this to knock out multiple contenders, you're gonna get a ton of points. And your dudes losing health usually isn't a big deal because you can forcibly flip your weak heroes back to unrivaled. This sets them back to 15 health, so you're essentially healing them. Then all opponents must relinquish 1 planet. That is so much value, and then you can just conquer these now to get +2 Gambit points for the conquest phase. Then finally, Cosmic Wrath gives 3 points. Like sheesh, this should not be allowed. I don't even think 5 guaranteed damage to everyone is even healthy in this game, so a card as swingy as Cosmic Wrath shouldn't even exist. Or if it does, make it like 15 EXP or something. Every time it's come up, people have to auto buy it or clear it to prevent someone else from just running away with the game. The last con is that there's going to be some player count problems. We've only played it at 2 and 3 players, and for the 4 players, well, it's kind of a mixed bag because mechanically it's better, which we'll explain in a bit, but there's also going to be so much downtime. If you think about how this game works, the majority of a turn is actually the combat phase where you're rolling, deciding what to reroll, then triggering all these abilities, and then having your opponent trigger your abilities, and then deciding what cards to play in hand as abilities. And so if you're not involved in combat, you're just sitting there doing nothing while 2 people are involved in this minigame. Now for the mechanics, the game would probably work better at 4. Since there's just more chaos and planets changing hands, it just makes more sense for more players in more chaos with more dice rolling. Like in our 2-player games, it was super clear that there's just not enough going on for games so reliant on players fighting. If there's only one other enemy, you're just manhunting each other around the map, making movement abilities extremely strong. And also once someone gets ahead or has a healing system that the other player can't really go around, there's basically nothing stopping them from closing out the game. Now there's TBD a lot more modes in this box, so maybe the 2v2 team doubles will better handle this. For 4 players, we don't know, it's all coming soon, so now it's just time for the scoring! So now it's time for a tentative score on Cosmic Conquest, where we try to critically evaluate the aforementioned pros and cons of this. This is a prototype. Also, we have the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. This is a lighthearted Avengers-like dice rolling frenzy where you assemble 3 contenders, then use countless abilities across planets and contender boards to get 20 points. And so the tentative score for this is going to be a 7 out of 10. It is tentatively good. So the thing with Cosmic Conquest is that the gameplay con of imbalance isn't really a big deal for this game because there's draft for the contenders. And since the game is so RNG laden with how the almost 100% unique armory cards come out, there's just going to be some janky setups, but that's fine for a game that's literally just based off of dice chucking anyways. The biggest concern for Cosmic Conquest is its role in the board game zeitgeist. As we said in the overview, this is kind of like King of Tokyo with rolling dice constantly, and then also you buy power-up cards from the middle. But then this game is easily 2 to 3 times as long as King of Tokyo with an insane amount of reading to do despite the initial rules being straightforward. Like you sit down and not only do you have to read the conquer and passive bonus of every planet, but you also have to read 3 abilities for each of your 3 characters and 3 abilities for all the opponents. That's a pretty monumental task for really any game. Yeah, this is definitely not an elegant game. This is why we harped on 4 players so much in the cons for downtime. And maybe if this game tried to be shorter to accommodate 4 players, or by adjusting some of the complexity, maybe reducing VP quantity or their health dials, then Cosmic Conquest wouldn't work, because then you couldn't do all the cool abilities on a regular basis because the game would time out, and some of the combos you can build up to are genuinely fascinating, with tons of replay value and hype dice roll. Like maybe you want the time to get in deep with the armory cards and save up EXP to buy 3 armory cards at once and then make the game-ending play. Man, there are so many item and weapon synergies with the contenders. Let's talk about the center thing you're looking at, the planets. They're kind of just like placeholders for abilities you see here. These abilities are cool, but the planets themselves aren't particularly thematic, nor do they interact with heroes very much aside from the every once in a while, oh, this is your home planet shtick. Like maybe planets could have interacted with more contender abilities besides just have home planet for more VPN game. But then Cosmic Conquest already has so many little abilities that planets do take a backseat and are mostly just places you can teleport to after combat to get nice gambit points after you meet their conquer or overthrow criteria. Like there could have been more planets for more playability, but they currently feel intentionally designed where everyone in a 4-player game can get one on turn 1. Then you all have the passive to play around with. Ultimately, if you're looking to get into a game like this, and if you're okay with the reading barrier to accessibility, the drafting will only get better over time. Cosmic Conquest is currently a beer and pretzels dice rolling game, but it certainly doesn't mean that there's not a lot of thinking of wanting to add more dice or symbols. There will be many combats where people are getting 9+ symbols when the base amount you roll is 6. And you'll teleport around the universe before or after attacking, abuse planet passives, and of course decide when to push your luck to get more double swords. It's a game that wants you to revel in the ability synergies abilities and armory possibilities rather than concise, perfectly balanced matches. It will take your group time to get familiar with all the contenders to properly draft this game, and then you really gotta love the dice rolling and then adding symbols, re-rolling symbols, counting them all up. That's just part of the dice rolling charm here. I'm not sure what the future holds for Cosmic Conquest, but if you love a game that sounds like this, yeah, this is certainly just a start. Now it's time for my personal score on it. My personal score for Cosmic Conquest is gonna be a 4 out of 10. I have a below average time with it. Before we go further, definitely know that I just don't like the look of this game. It has a Saturday morning cartoon look, which is, it's fine. There's an audience for this. I'm trying to get into it. It doesn't connect with me. Okay, now for gameplay. Here's the thing, I actually like moments in this game. It's just that the game as a whole is a package that's not really to my liking. I could see my score easily going up with a couple tweaks here and there, but I'm not sure if my desires are what the designer had in mind when they wanted to make a game like this. For example, I really like rolling dice and getting rerolls because the possibilities of double swords is just insanely addicting, and it's like I'm playing slots with my opponent's health. However, just like playing slots for me, it does get old because a game where you're constantly just bashing each other to do this feels repetitive. Just think about how one of the best default turns you can get is to have some type of planet bonus and for an opponent to be trapped on a planet with you. Then you attack them twice. Like, it's satisfying to do damage there, but it's not particularly mentally stimulating gameplay for me. Oh, I just pick up the dice again. If I do enough damage, I get a point. Yay. It's probably why a game similar to this is so short. Speaking of all that, all the contender abilities and how they synergize is definitely meant to be the cool theory crafting and counterplay, but for me, it just doesn't really invite that. It's because the contenders fall in a weird situation where first of all, they're so wordy that it's a pain to go through all of them, but secondly, they're actually not too different from one another to make the payoff from understanding them feel that exciting. Like most contenders in this game will give you a way to reroll more dice, or add symbols, or heal. Whereas if I think of other medium weight or heavier games with asymmetry, you start on a different home planet that affects your early game, or you can use a special ability in your own timing window, or play cards a certain way, or you have an insane amount of health. In Cosmic Conquest, characters just feel very standard, like they had to conform to some high school rubric, and that's not too engaging, and I don't identify with any of them very much. This gets added to the planets, where I explained in the Tentative Score, I understand why they're set up in this way, but they just feel very soulless to me. Like these could be asteroids for all I care. Like when I first saw them and the contenders, I was thinking, oh, maybe there's dropping off contenders in areas to secure them, so I can have cool player expression and how I move around the universe. But no, that's not really the case. So how about the cards then? Well, those are fun in like a junk food way because they're totally random when they come out. So sometimes people will just get cards that happen to be really good. Like, heck yeah, it's fun to do a great combo with the armory cards or load up with weapons on one dude and just start blasting. But ultimately, that's not very in-depth for me with how much heavy lifting the game is making you do otherwise with understanding ability. The hurdle to jump over to properly plan attacks just doesn't feel worth the energy for me. So again, this game isn't brain dead, it's far from it. I had a buddy analysis paralysis the heck out for a 25-minute turn and then score 6 points to basically secure him the game. It was very well played and I was impressed and he had a good time with it. It's just not for me. For these Ameritrash-like games where you're sometimes attacking twice in a turn, well, there really needs to be more reason for me to be attacking. Why I'm attacking. For these Ameritrash games where sometimes your whole entire turn will be attacking back to back, there really needs to be for me more of an emphasis on why you're attacking back to back. Why are we fighting this fight? Whereas in Cosmic Conquest, it usually boils down to, oh, that guy's just at 1 HP, obviously you kill them. Or, hey, I'm just farming points so I can do planet prereqs. Whereas maybe wargame fighting like War for Arrakis has the appeal of moving units to do an attack, or how there's so many things you could possibly attack. Or card games where maybe you pass on attacking, or you can attack your opponent directly. Cosmic Conquest actually reminds me most of the Ameritrash dice roller Mythic Battles Ragnarok, where you're also supposed to draft a team and using characters is cool. In Mythic Battles, I identified with the Nordic characters more, but that game didn't have the as fun dice rolling swings as Cosmic Conquest did, so it didn't quite reach the same highs, but it also didn't require me to do so much reading legwork to play the game. What are some changes that would make this game fit my personal taste more? Well, I would 100% agree with my buddy that was initially very skeptical about this game and then eventually said it was just fine. I'm impressed because he's really picky about games. But anyways, he said that this game should have complexity between it and King of Tokyo. So between this line, between this game and King of Tokyo, it should just fall somewhere in between that. Keep the same heart of the re-rolling, dice rolling, and then the zany armory card play, but just make it shorter, make abilities less wordy, maybe even just make contender health lower. Because Cosmic Conquest currently tends to run at least 1.5 hours for 3 players, and that 2 players doesn't really work, my score drops from a 5 to a 4 out of 10. I don't dislike any part about this game that much, especially since I already spent the effort to understand many characters and have a lot of the planet prereqs and passives memorized. It just gets a little bit boring for me after the halfway mark, and I just can't be bothered to check all of my opponent contender boards for their abilities again. Oh, also the word contender is hilarious. Like, oh, I could have been someone. I could have been a contender, you know? Anyways, 4 out of 10 personally for me, but again, with this review, you can tell I can't really find too much wrong with this game for the crowd it's meant to be for. That was a review of Cosmic Conquest. Again, this being sent to us did not affect scoring. And as always, if you like our stuff, well, support us on Ko-fi or Patreon. Yeah, and here are our Patreon subscribers over here. Thank you guys. Anyways, that's it for now. We'll have many more videos coming. Many. They're always coming, guys. Anyways, yeah, let me know what you think of this game. Maybe King of Tokyo, comparisons between the two. Maybe some ideas on how this could be a more middle ground between it and King of Tokyo. Anyways, see you guys later.